Hi folks, let's discuss twin flames. It's been on my list to do for a while and I had forgotten about it because I had made a video of it once some time ago now on a different channel. But this topic came up not too long ago with a client, so it's been floating around in my brain upstairs. So let's discuss what's going on with the twin flame phenomenon. We'll consider it, of course, through an esoteric lens, but also with some of the psychological roots of what's going on here, because really what we're looking at in the twin flame scenario is the interplay of a Libran problem of the contrasexual opposite, that is the Anima and the Animus problem, at least from what I have seen. So if you want to learn more about the twin flame phenomenon, stick around. There is some different lore about the twin flame story, that is L-O-R-E, lore, depending on what pocket of the internet you stumble into. But the essential idea that's pretty consistent is that this is the other half of your soul, the twin flame, the identical spirit, one incarnating into the feminine pole through a woman's body, or the other incarnating into a masculine pole, or the man's body. But whenever we have this kind of language afloat, we can know for sure that we are in the realm of the projection of the Anima and the Animus. Because metaphysically, a soul cannot split in two. This is a very strange idea that only exists in our realm of duality and through our limited understanding through a dualistic lens. It's not what the soul does. Of course, when you look at a lot of these twin flame relationships that people go through, there'll be all of this astral glamour around it with, this is my spiritual purpose, this is the great love of my life, we're supposed to be together, there's karmic ties through past lives, we're here to blah, 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 and all of this. But so often these relationships are filled with drama, chaos, conflicts, and they're fundamentally very unstable. And we know esoterically that instability is really a consequence of mutable cross influences, which is the life of the personality. It's not to say that there isn't some kind of solar process going on though, especially for those people who are moving towards a spiritual urge and they want to live a life of meaning and purpose and to really do their best to leave something behind worthwhile. If this is the fundamental urge of the person and then they have something of this twin flame experience, this is actually part of perhaps an early scorpionic test, or certainly a plutonic test, because when we start to move with that spiritual urge and we start to get closer to those points of threshold where we really get certain fundamental core lessons in terms of our spiritual maturation, then we come up against these distortions within our own astral space. And so sometimes it's actually true that these relationships are initiatory spiritually, but not for the reason that the person in them at the time of the happening of the relationship thinks or believes it to be. Because at the end of the day, a true soul-based relationship, that is one really anchored in the soul, really anchored in spiritual purpose, and is really one evoking the true law of love, these relationships are stable, they are consistent. It's not to say that they are without conflict, because we naturally have the regular trials and tribulations of relationship and all of those different things and problems to work out, of course, and that can happen in the soul-based relationship too. But there will be a foundation of deep stability and reliability in a true soul-based connection. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Now, for the people in the phases of the twin flame dynamic where they're in this push and pull with the projection, they think it's true love, but eventually what happens is there's some kind of break, and then post dealing with it all, they go, actually, there wasn't really a whole lot of love there. There was a lot of astral desire there. And it can be difficult too in our post-rational age, where we have a lot of psychic phenomenon get stirred up as a result of the activation of all this astral stuff, where we have synchronicities and you're thinking of them and there's kind of like a telepathic thing, or they call you in that moment and then you dream of them and you're having this astral sex desire, I'm not eating everything, all of this stuff that can happen, and it feels so magical. And in our post-rational society, we go, oh, well, this is spiritual and therefore very of a particular kind of magic, and therefore it is truthful. But really, we've just got this deep activation of the astral plane, and this is where we can get all this connectivity and all of that watery substance. And yes, it's kind of cool in a way, but it's always coming back to that fundamental Venusian problem. And of course, Venus being a planet of relationship and desire, and in her lower octave is the astral desire, and then has to evolve into right discrimination, as we talked about in the last video with Venus and Lucifer, right? That Venusian problem of, but is this true? Is this actually love? Would a real loving situation express in this way? So this goes down a lot for people in different ways. I would say the space is skewed slightly more towards the women with the demon Animus problem, where they get the narcissistic male or the Mercurial Animus male. That Mercurial, and I see it a lot, especially with women with mutability in the chart. And I'm a Gemini rising, I had a very Mercurial Animus problem. So with that, and this is why Gemini gets a bad rap often, especially Gemini men being like shape-shifty, right? That's Mercury in its lesser aspect. That's the trickster, the deceiving brothers, or the and the fundamental quality of that is the inversion of the slippery nature, which in its best sense can be that which goes into all these different places and can bring about the messages. That's Mercury, the messenger of the gods, and can kind of go into everything and bring all kinds of information to the table. The shadow of that is not having any depth into anything true. And there you get superficiality or the deceptiveness, or in its worst case, as we see a lot of the time with personality disorders, and psychopathy with mutability in the chart, and sometimes too on the feminine angle with borderline. So you see that a lot. It can happen for men too. I've seen it happen with men where they have a kind of borderline type personality with a woman that's a bit, that goes into that pole as well. So there can be different angles of it, and yes, sometimes there can also be the female narcissist as well. So it's not super concrete. There's many different angles of it. But because women are a little bit by nature connected into the relational principle more, and the Animus problem for so many women is just so gripping, we tend to maybe see a little bit more of that if we took all the data on that. I would suspect we'd see a statistical leaning towards that bracket with this experience. Maybe only just though. So this thing of, this is my other half, this is my soul, whenever you've got this desirous, intense emotional quality like that, that's when you know you're in the realm of psychic projection. 100%, especially if it's the other half. Well, that's you. You're projecting yourself. There's a great quote, I think by Thomas Merton, the Christian mystic, who said something about the soul. When the soul wants to learn something or discover something, she, and he described it as a feminine counterpart, thrusts an image outside of her to have it reflected back. I'm butchering it completely, but that was the essence of it. And I loved that description. I thought it was so poetic and accurate, a very fourth ray process. And of course, psyche, the psychological experience of the human, the interplay of the opposites, is a very fourth ray subject matter here, and the push and pull with the dynamics and all of this. So when you've got that kind of emotional intensity, that's when you know you're in the realm of the astral, as opposed to the realm of the soul. What people usually have to learn through this experience is to become reflective enough on, what is it that I am seeing in this person? Well, who do I think they are versus who are they actually based on their behaviors and what's consistently showing up? Like, you have to withdraw. Again, if we think of Venus in her lower quality and the lower aspect of Libra, of wanting to merge with the other, Aphrodite and the conjunctio, and also why Venus has detriment in Aries, where there can be like immediate fusing of things, right, without discernment. We have to start pulling things back and develop that reasoning faculty, and certainly for a woman, that's a part of the maturation of her own principle of consciousness as her masculine counterpart, and so that the consciousness starts relating to the feminine. Like, how does this person really make me feel? And where am I coming from with my feelings in it? And is my feeling true, or is it coming from a different place? Is it coming from projection? Is it coming from the wound? So this is why so often these relationships are so plutonic in nature, or destructive, or end up being abusive, or just deluded and confusing, and can leave people with a lot of mess. But it is a great opportunity for the reorganization of one's own material. And as I said, even though these sorts of relationships end up not being what the person thought they were, they are and can be and often are a consequence of a deeper inner drive towards spiritual maturation. Because once again, when we polarize into the principle of truth, or the more we want to really come to know love, we will first, when that is sincere, we will then get thrusted into those tests of distortion around the subject of love, of the Maya, of our own glamoured illusions, the parts of us that were selfish or are fundamentally moving from a self-oriented place, our inability to take responsibility for our own individuation process, for our own solarization process. I've seen women get that angle of, oh, this man saved me, the saviour. This is the Animus projection, because the masculine principle is the principle of consciousness and therefore the salvation. This is why you have the motif of the prince in the fairy tale who kisses the sleeping beauty and wakes her up out of the true love's first kiss. That is, that the principle of consciousness embodied by the male prince is reaching down into the feminine, which has been put to sleep or atrophied or killed as a result of all these nefarious forces, and it brings her back to life, and then you've got the marriage. So that projection of the saviour, oh, he is my spiritual purpose, oh, I wouldn't be anywhere without him. I mean, I can say that in truth about my husband, like, well, there's a real love there, and in many ways we have built a life together and have helped each other work out of so many different problems. So we've saved each other in a way, but we both went through these kind of twin flamey dynamics with his own negative anima. He had quite a psychotic, very not there person who was doing all kinds of wild stuff, and as did I with a man that I was with. So we had both gone through that and had gone through an interior awakening as a result of that into a kind of transpersonal love, which requires a relinquishment of personal desire and fundamental selfishness. But that experience, that initiation, is what became the new attracting point, if you will, if we take the law of attraction language, well, that's what brought us together, right? And then there was just a recognition of, oh, this is actually a man who will literally do anything in the name of consciousness. And that's kind of what I didn't use that language at the time, but that was sort of the delusion I had about this other person. But of course, I hadn't been initiated into that realm of consciousness myself at that time. I was still stuck in the Maya, so to speak, my own glamour and delusions, playing them out on this chaotic screen of life as part of that mutable instability and all of that. And so when we came together after the cosmic or the mystical initiation, now he had truly anchored into a true awareness of what actual transpersonal divine love was. That's the Piscean problem. That's why Pisces is the sign of salvation, or why Christ saves. You know, pray to Jesus, he will save you. I was in hell before and then I was saved. It's this awakening of the transpersonal heart that happens, and that has to be the precursor for a true relationship. And this is why people who've gone through a lot of relational trauma, or that this area of life still hasn't been able to flourish, it's because they haven't yet gone through that surrender or that deeper inquiry and discernment as to what true love is and what they are first willing to do in the name of serving that love, because that's the real commitment. And then you can get a person in that reflects that commitment. That's how it works. So this ended up being a conversation about twin flames, but also about how to really initiate oneself into a true soul-centered partnership. But it has to be about your commitment to the spiritual purpose and the God principle. And you have to be willing to step into that, even if it means being a monk for the rest of your life, even if it means going off in a cave somewhere, even if it means relinquishing all your desires and relinquishing all your material possessions and relinquishing the idea that you'll ever have any kind of romantic or sexually satiable relationship ever again. That's the thing that people don't want to go through. And of course, all of those things can still be a part of the equation, matter or sexuality and human love. But when we get to this point where the sacrifice needs to be made, this is the point of no return. And that is where you do have to relinquish, because that's the one thing that keeps people from that surrender. It's, what if I surrender to my soul and then it means that I won't get any of these things that I want? That's what prevents people from crossing that threshold. But that's the only way that you'll be able to gain anything true in this life. That's the religious motive. What every saint and mystic has said, to those who give all is given. But it's not like you can get away with, okay, I give everything, but secretly I'm kind of waiting for when I get to receive everything. No, that part of your consciousness has to burn, and that becomes that plutonic activation, which is, again, Piscean motif and the death out of the mutable cross. That's the lesser burning ground. Pluto rules the lesser burning ground of Maya. That's what's going on there. So this was a conversation about the nature of the twin flame problem in terms of it being this Anima Animus problem, and so often that's also clumped together with our first imprints of the masculine and feminine, which is often the mother complex and the father complex. So they are often coloured together. It's like when we go into individuation and go deeper into the dream work later, what will eventually happen is, let's say in the woman's psyche, her true animus will emerge. But usually she has to reorganize all of that, the warped info that came from the father image, and where that's still been clumped together and how that's informing her animus from a not true interior place. And the same thing vice versa for a man with the anima problem in his psyche. But that's the twin flame aspect in terms of this psychic motif that goes on with the depth psychology and the Scorpio realm of the Maya and desire and lower Venus and all of this. And then there's that piece of, then how do we bring in a true relationship? Well, you need to be in true relationship with your own spiritual purpose. And that has to start as a solitary act because it's about you and God. That has to be the center. It's always God and the principle of truth at the center of the relationship. And that has to be 1000% steadfast. And until that movement is made, you cannot bring someone in who's going to reflect that quality of consciousness to you because you haven't anchored yourself in that. So that's where you're going to keep getting, for those of you that are struggling with this or have had this motif come up, because it means that the soul's trying to get at you and go, learn this lesson so I can merge with you deeper, please. You see how that's the elevation of the octave of the 7th house, of Libra too, of course, but 7th house being the place of marriage, partnership, the shadow, the other, open enemies. Higher octave is dweller on the threshold. It's the psychic opposite, meeting the deeper shadow, crucifixion of your own desires, all of this. All right, I think that's all I have to say on the subject today. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao.